The moment the credit card slipped back across the table untouched, something inside her chest quietly cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to hurt. The kind of hurt that doesn't bleed but lingers. The kind that settles deep and reminds you how small the world can make you feel when it decides you are invisible. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that remind us humanity still matters, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive. The restaurant was one of those places that tried very hard to look effortless. Soft golden lights hung low, polished wood reflected gentle warmth, and the hum of expensive conversations floated through the air like background music. It was the kind of restaurant where the menus had no prices printed, where the wine list was thicker than most novels, and where people came not just to eat, but to be seen. Outside, luxury cars lined the street, their glossy bodies reflecting city lights like trophies. Inside, everything whispered money. For Elena Rivera, this place was not a whisper. It was a roar. She had been working there for almost 3 years, balancing trays heavier than her exhaustion, memorizing preferences of people who rarely looked at her face. She was 29, with tired eyes that carried too much responsibility and hands that moved with practiced grace. Every shift was a careful performance of politeness, patience, and restraint. She smiled because it was expected. She apologized even when she had done nothing wrong, and she swallowed small humiliations because rent didn't care about pride. That night, she was assigned to a corner table occupied by 4 men in tailored suits. They arrived loud and confident, the kind of men whose laughter carried entitlement, whose watches caught the light intentionally. They spoke about deals, acquisitions, and vacations in places Elena would probably never see. She moved back and forth between the kitchen and their table, refilling glasses, adjusting plates, absorbing their dismissive glances. To them, she was part of the furniture. Useful, replaceable, forgettable. As the evening wore on, the table grew messier. Half-finished cocktails, crumpled napkins, a sense of careless abundance. Elena stayed professional, even when one of the men snapped his fingers instead of saying her name. Even when another rolled his eyes as she carefully explained a dish. She had learned not to react. Reaction cost tips. Reaction cost jobs. When the bill finally came, thick and leather-bound, Elena placed it gently at the center of the table and stepped back. She waited. She always waited. It was an invisible pause that felt longer every time. One of the men picked it up, flipped through it lazily, then smirked. Another leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. They exchanged looks that carried something ugly, something practiced. Elena watched as the bill was pushed aside. No wallet came out. No card was offered. The men stood, adjusted their jackets, and began gathering their things. One of them glanced at Elena with a look that was almost amused, as if daring her to speak. She did, softly, carefully. Her voice trembled just enough to betray her fear. They laughed. Not loudly, but enough. Enough to hurt. Enough to tell her they had already decided she didn't matter. They walked past her, past the host stand, past the exit, leaving behind an unpaid bill that equaled nearly 2 weeks of her wages. The air felt heavier as the door closed behind them. Elena stood frozen for a moment, staring at the empty chairs. Her heart pounded. In restaurants like this, unpaid bills didn't disappear. They landed on someone, and tonight, that someone was her. She felt the familiar panic rise, sharp and unforgiving. Rent was due. Her mother's medical bills were already late. Her younger brother depended on her paycheck. There was no room for this kind of loss. Her manager approached, face tight with irritation rather than concern. He looked at the table, then at her, already forming assumptions. Elena tried to explain, words tumbling over each other, but explanations rarely mattered. Responsibility rolled downhill. It always did. She nodded because fighting would only make it worse. She nodded because she had learned survival sometimes meant silence. She went to the back hallway, where the walls were dull and the lights flickered. She leaned against the cold surface and finally allowed herself to breathe. Tears threatened, but she forced them back. Crying didn't fix anything. Crying didn't pay bills. She wiped her face, straightened her apron, and returned to the floor, carrying the weight of injustice like another tray. What Elena didn't know was that the restaurant owner had chosen that night to dine quietly at the bar. Daniel Cross was a name spoken in hushed tones in financial magazines and boardrooms, a billionaire who had built his empire from nothing, known for sharp instincts and even sharper expectations. He rarely interfered with daily operations, trusting systems and people to function without him. But that night, he had heard something he couldn't ignore. From his seat, Daniel had watched the men leave without paying. He had seen the shift in Elena's posture, the way her shoulders curved inward as if bracing for impact. He noticed the manager's reaction, the absence of empathy, the quick assignment of blame. Years of negotiating had trained Daniel to read rooms, to notice what others overlooked, and what he saw unsettled him. He followed Elena with his eyes as she moved mechanically through her tasks, her smile thinner now, her energy drained. He listened as staff whispered, as assumptions were made, as injustice quietly settled into routine. Something about it stirred memories he hadn't visited in decades. Memories of his own mother, working double shifts at diners, coming home exhausted and silent. Memories of watching her be treated as less than human by people who never knew her name. Daniel didn't intervene immediately. He waited. He observed. He needed to understand the culture he had unknowingly allowed to grow under his name. By the end of the night, Elena felt hollow. When her shift finally ended, she changed slowly, every movement heavy. She stepped outside into the cool night air, the city buzzing around her, indifferent. She wondered how she would explain the missing money. She wondered how many more nights like this she could endure before something inside her broke for good. The next morning, Elena was called into the office. Her stomach twisted as she walked down the familiar hallway, already preparing herself for reprimand or worse. She didn't know that everything was about to change. Inside the office, Daniel Cross sat quietly, hands folded, eyes calm but attentive. The manager stood nearby, visibly tense. Elena felt small as she took a seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She expected accusations. Instead, she was met with silence. Daniel spoke slowly, deliberately. He asked her to recount the previous night. He listened without interruption as she described the table, the refusal, the aftermath. Her voice shook, but she didn't embellish. She didn't need to. The truth was heavy enough. When she finished, Daniel leaned back, his expression unreadable. Then he asked about her life, her hours, her responsibilities. No one had ever asked her that before in this building. She answered honestly, surprised by the lump forming in her throat. Daniel turned to the manager and asked questions that cut deep. Policies, accountability, training. The answers sounded hollow even to Elena's ears. The room felt different now. The balance of power had shifted. The unpaid bill was voided. Elena was reimbursed. But Daniel didn't stop there. He addressed the culture that allowed guests to walk out without consequence while employees bore the cost. He made it clear that dignity was not optional, that respect was not negotiable. Policies were changed that day, not quietly, not temporarily, but permanently. For Elena, the changes went beyond policy. Daniel saw something in her resilience, in the way she endured without bitterness. He offered her opportunities she had never imagined. Training, advancement, a chance to move into management if she wanted it. He didn't frame it as charity, he framed it as recognition. Weeks passed and Elena's life slowly began to shift. The weight on her chest eased. She stood a little taller. She smiled not because she had to, but because she could. She found confidence she didn't know she possessed, and purpose she thought was reserved for others. The restaurant felt different now, safer, fairer. The men who had walked out that night were contacted. Consequences followed, not out of revenge, but out of principle. The message was clear. Wealth did not excuse cruelty. Power did not grant permission to dehumanize. Daniel continued to visit the restaurant not as an overseer, but as a presence. He watched his staff thrive when treated with respect. He listened more than he spoke, and he carried with him a quiet reminder of why he started his journey in the first place. Elena often thought back to that moment when the credit card slid away untouched, how close she had been to giving up, how fragile hope could be. She realized that sometimes change doesn't come with noise or applause. Sometimes it arrives because someone chose to listen. If this story has touched your heart, if it reminded you of the quiet strength of everyday people and the power of doing the right thing, please take a moment now to like this video. Share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that matter. Before this story ends, we have a special request for you. Please comment below with the words, "Kindness still matters." Your comments help this message reach more people. Elena's story wasn't about a billionaire saving a waitress. It was about dignity being restored, about humanity being seen, about the reminder that no one is invisible unless we choose to look away. And sometimes all it takes to change a life is the courage to hear what others ignore.